My name is Logan, and this is my Aquascaping Studio. Welcome back to Logan Rando Aquascaping. Today, I'm gonna take you on a long overdue tour of my entire aquascaping studio here in San Diego, California. So I've been living in this apartment for 8 months, so all the tanks are of course less than a year old, but I'm happy to say that most of them are really in peak condition. So I'm gonna walk you through each and every one of them, how they got to the state they are in now. We'll talk about the trials and tribulations, and we'll talk a little bit about some future builds as well. So if you're into this type of content, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with a friend. Now let's get started with the tour. So first up on the tour is my pride and joy and the oldest aquascape in my studio. This is my UNS 60U, and it's a 20-gallon aquarium. And I'm happy to say that this tank is fully balanced, and it is just an absolute pleasure to keep. So this is a classic iwagumi, and the carpet you see up front is Glossostigma elatinoides. And this is honestly fast becoming one of my favorite carpeting plants. It was actually quite easy to carpet. In the beginning of the tank's life, it suffered from a little bit of melt, some diatoms, the usual suspects, but it just came out of that super hot and beautiful and kind of rose out of it like a phoenix. And now it's just really easy to keep. I do have to trim the carpet about every 3 weeks, so for some people that's a lot of maintenance, but for me, I don't mind it. I'm in my tanks a couple times a week doing water changes, so I just plan a Saturday out every 3 weeks or so when I can do the trimming. But as you can see, this tank also has some beautiful livestock, which really pops out from the greenery. We've got a school of 30 ember tetras, and we've got a ton of red cherry shrimp. So many I can't even count. I started off with a lot. I put about 100 in, and they've bred like crazy. I've got multiple generations. So if you're in the San Diego area and you want to buy some cheap Neocaridina super red cherries, hit me up. But I'm just loving this tank. It's such a pleasure to keep, and I designed it kind of in the style of that classic Takashi Amano iwagumi. And I found that the plant in the back has really turned a nice red. This is Juncus repens. So when you grow this plant under high PAR, and by PAR I mean photosynthetically active radiation, basically that's lighting that contains the wavelengths that plants use to really thrive. When you grow this plant under that type of lighting, it expresses this red coloration. So kind of a happy little accident. I didn't know that, and it adds a nice pop to the background that I think kind of complements the cherry shrimp and the ember tetras. And then in the midground, we have Lanthium Tetalum Green, which is one of my favorite plants. Super easy, super low maintenance, and we also have some Eleocharis speckled here and there. The stone itself has a really cool story. So I collected this in Portland, Oregon, where I was living for 2 years, and I honestly spent about a year or so collecting the stone, finding a piece I really liked out in the wild, out on a hike, bringing it back home, and then I set it up in Portland only to find out I was moving. So I transported everything, including these heavy ass rocks, and thankfully they made it safely over to San Diego, and I was able to recreate the scape, and I just love it. You know, I'll always be an iwagumi fan. I know some people find them boring, but for me, they're the thing that got me into this hobby. So to have one like this that is just so reliable and beautiful and peaceful and zen-like, I don't know, it just makes me really happy. Moving on to the next tank in this tour, we've got my UNS 35 all-in-one aquarium. And I gotta be honest, when I first set up this aquarium, I was a little bit doubtful. Boost Plant had sent me over this all-in-one aquarium, and I'm just not really an all-in-one guy. I like piecing things together for that nice kind of bespoke gallery look. But as I said in the creation video, this is by far the best all-in-one aquarium on the market. It's super sleek, there's no gaudy aspect to it, and the filtration chamber in the back is honestly really nice to deal with. So this tank was set up to showcase a variety of beautiful rheophytic plants. And you may have heard rheophytes referred to as epiphytes in the past. I'm trying to correct that, because technically an epiphyte is something that latches on to a piece of hardscape like an air plant does on a tree, or a monstera in Florida. Rheophytes grow in water, you know, partially submerged. So I'm gonna try and start using the correct term, but this tank has a ton of rheophytes, lots of different Bucephalandra species, so many I can't even name them all, and I've forgotten half the names. And it also has lots of Anubias nonapetite. And just like my other tank, the UNS 60U, this one started off a little bit rough, lots of that ugly biofilm on the wood that you have to scrub off every week, lots of diatoms, having to siphon out the sand, but but it's in a really beautiful state right now. The wood remains pretty much pristine, and the plants are vibrant and green and just showing off that brilliant arrangement of hues. So I absolutely love this one. I just recently added a school of celestial pearl danios to this, and I honestly think they are the perfect fish for this aquarium because of their color composition. Between the UNS gravel that I have in here, the sand, the wood, and the plants, I think the CPDs kind of mimic some of those colors without blending into them, and they sort of tie things together in this really cool look. So when I'm selecting fish, I don't want them to blend in with the plants or the background because, you know, in aquascaping, fish are essentially meant to be a visual accent. I try and find fish that are gonna contrast nicely from the background, but also harmonize with it really well. And I think these CPDs are just absolutely beautiful in here. They're such a joy to watch. They're such a ballsy, rambunctious fish. I mean, you'll never know that when you first get them. They're really shy in the beginning, really pale in the beginning, but with enough of them, especially a nice mix of males and females, the males will start to show off vibrant, bright, showy colors. And there's a lot of really interesting behavior they have. They'll, you know, kind of chase each other around, peck at each other here and there, but they're generally quite peaceful. So they do really well with shrimp. And speaking of shrimp, I have a breeding colony of the yellow cherry shrimp in here. So it's the same species as the red cherries in my UNS 60U, except these have been bred to express a yellow color. How cool is that? So Neocaridina is a genus of shrimp. You may have heard of Caridina. Neos are the easier, more adaptable variety. So if you're new to shrimp keeping, you might consider keeping one of these colors. They're really awesome and they're breeding. I got a couple generations going in this tank, so really enjoying this one. So next up in our tour, I've got my UNS 5S, which is one of the smallest aquariums I've ever kept, and it's my first shallow aquarium, which I was just super excited for. Big fan of shallow tanks. So this one prominently features some desert wood, which I locally collected here in Southern California. And having such a tiny tank, I mean, it's only 2 gallons, I knew I had to do something impactful with the hardscape. So that's why I put this giant wood in here. It's probably about 5 or 6 large pieces that I spent a lot of time strategically placing and then gluing to Ceru stone. And I was happy to see by the end of it, it had a really natural look. And then I've got UNS Contrasand Bora, and then the Contrasand Santa Fe. Santa Fe is the gravel. And I think it complements the stone as well as the wood really nicely. So let's talk about the plants. So this tank is actually one of the newer aquascapes in my studio. I flooded it about 5 weeks ago. So you can see the plants are still adapting. Boost for me usually melts back a little bit. I'll lose some leaves, maybe an entire plant here and there. So it's perhaps a little bit more bare than it will be in a few months, but that's all right. I've been down this rodeo many times with boosts. That's how it was for me in the UNS 35A all-in-one. So it's kind of done with that melting process, and I just kind of scrubbed away any dead tissue, as you should when you have melting plants. But generally speaking, it stays pretty tidy. It's filtered by the Mighty Aquarium filter from Boost Plant. This is the extra small variety. I'm not a huge HOB filter fan, but at the time of setup, I just didn't have a better option. I may eventually do a canister filter. I do have a spare UNS Delta. However, I'm worried that perhaps the flow on that is gonna be a little bit too strong. I don't know, I gotta think about it, but for now, this tank is a total joy, and you may have noticed the beautiful school of chili rasboras, and these are true chili rasboras. I picked them up from my local fish store, Pet Zone on Convoy in San Diego, and they're really proud to keep a large variety of that true chili, because often when you go to the store, you'll see a mix of Boraras, but it's sometimes strawberry Boraras, Phoenix rasboras, exclamation point rasboras, so to find the true chilies can be a little bit difficult. And these guys are looking really beautiful. However, in a few months, when they mature, which can often take up to 6 months after getting them from the store, they'll display an even more vibrant red coloration, which is how they get their name, the chili rasbora. So I love these guys. Got to be really careful when you're keeping these. They'll get sucked up into just about any filter, so make sure your intake is protected. I've got a little sponge on my filter. These guys are just really enjoying that overgrown look. They feed readily. I see them kind of hanging out in the back. That plant I have there in the back, that's Blixa japonica. It's my first time keeping it. And the chili rasboras seem to enjoy it just as much as I do. So I love this tank. I can't wait to see how it develops. I'll definitely have an update out soon. And I'm thinking about adding a really beautiful beautiful, delicate Caridina species. So let me know your recommendations. I know Boost Plant carries some cool ones, maybe like a Galaxy Pinto or Fishbone or something like that. Moving on to the second to last aquarium in my Aquascaping Studio tour, my UNS 45U. And in many of my videos, I've described this as my problem child, but I'm happy to say that my problem child has graduated behavior school. It is now behaving, the algae is gone, the diatoms are gone, and it's actually looking pretty decent now. So this is a tank that has tested my patience, it has tested my perseverance, but it's also challenged me to kind of stick with things, and when all else fails, to kind of switch things up and try a new path. So initially it looked completely different. I had all this dragonwood in here for this dramatic look, and I just couldn't get rid of the diatoms, and it was inhibiting the plant growth, and did a soft rescape, put in new hardscape, recycled some of the plants, added new plants, and things were looking so-so for a while. I gave it a few months, but I noticed that parts of the tank weren't thriving, and other parts, the ones that were in close proximity to the CO2 diffuser, were thriving. So I decided to switch things up and add inline CO2, and I think it's working. So just last week, I did a big trimming on this tank, and it's finally looking really good. I'm loving the colors, how all the greenery contrasts from the LED background. I'm loving how the cherry shrimp pop out from the plants, and I'm loving how the Blixa japonica, as well as the Rotala wallichii in the back, are really thriving under that high par TWINSTAR lighting and demonstrating a beautiful, vibrant red color. So this tank does need a little bit more time to reach its true peak, but I think I've finally stabilized things. I used to have CPDs in here, but I honestly thought they just weren't right for the scape, not so much because of their color, but because this is set up to really establish a sense of scale with the mountains. I honestly thought they were a little bit too big, which sounds silly, but in these little tanks like this, I mean, the UNS 45U, it's 9 gallons. When you're trying to establish scale, unless you use a teeny tiny fish, it's easy to break things. So I might just keep it as a red cherry shrimp tank, which I think looks really cool. But if you have any suggestions for a little nano fish, particularly a red one that could look cool in here, let me know. I don't want to do chilies because I already have those in the UNS 5S, but if there's another really tiny red fish that could look cool in here, let me know. I'm open to suggestions. So moving on to the final tank in my studio. This one is not flooded and it's not planted, but I thought I'd show it. I just released a full setup video on this. This is the UNS 16S and it's 0.7 gallons. By far the smallest little aquarium I've ever worked with. So I've only set the hardscape up. It's got a combination of some more of that locally collected desert wood as well as some beautiful wolfstone. And I'm gonna run this as my first ever low-tech tank. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a high-tech guy, as you can tell. I've got CO2, high par lighting, and I dose ferts in all my aquariums. So to run this bad boy without a filter, without CO2, I'm a little bit nervous, but let me know your tips and let me know what plants you would add. So those are all the tanks I've got going on as of spring 2024, but I also want to talk about a few general things about how I maintain my aquariums, the type of water I use, and I want to tell you about my next project, which I'm so excited for. So water is rock hard here in Southern California, or at least in San Diego where I live, and I did use tap water for the first 6 months or so, just to kind of test things out. I've only lived in soft water areas in the past, so I wanted to see what I could do in hard water, and I'm happy to say it didn't seem to really inhibit any sort of positive growth or results. However, I did often deal with diatoms and a little bit of algae in the beginning, so that could be related to the tap water, but you know, without running a side-by-side study where I do one with the tap, one with the soft water in identical conditions, I can't necessarily blame it on the tap. So could be an interesting little side-by-side to run in the future, but I did eventually decide to switch over to RO because, you know, as I grow in quantity of tanks, I want to really guarantee myself certain results. And that's the good thing about RO. You essentially reset your water to 0 TDS, meaning it's pure water, and then you can add whatever you want to it to create ideal conditions. And I also want to be able to keep some delicate Caridina shrimp in here, which require very low KH, very low TDS water. So the RO lets me do that. I've got a boosted system, so my tanks fill up relatively quickly, which is nice. In terms of how I filter my tanks, I'm a huge fan of canister filters, particularly be the OASE Biomaster Thermo line. I love these because number one, it's got that removable heater, which is actually attached to the filter itself, which is so nice. One less piece of equipment you've got to have in the tank. And they're really easy to maintain because they've got this pre-filter that you can take out. So you don't actually have to do maintenance on the canister itself frequently at all. I think I maybe do it like every 6 months. So these are great. And of course on the 5S, I've got that little HOB filter, but canisters are by far my favorite type of aquarium filter because they're easily hidden and you can really customize them. And with these Biomasters, they've got that heater that you can also remove if you don't need it. For lighting, I primarily run TWINSTAR lighting, usually the S line. That's their highest par, highest quality, also most expensive line. And those are great. You can buy little external inline dimmers for them now. TWINSTAR makes a great one. Some of the lights come with them. And I've suspended the majority of my lighting. And for me, this has just been an absolute game changer. It makes maintenance easy. It's got that cool gallery look to it. You know, I said in the beginning, I like going for that bespoke look. So that's very much conducive to that. I run CO2 on every one of my tanks. It's always pressurized. The diffusers I swear by, AQUARIUM diffusers. They're super tiny. They come in a variety of lengths and you can customize them. You can even cut them up if you need a really short one. These are the best, but I've also been digging the inline CO2 as well that I've got on my UNS 45U. That's how you're gonna get the absolute best dissolution of the CO2 in the water column. For fertilizer, most of the tanks in here I dose with the balance method, which is macros one day, micros on one day. It's balanced because it's not quite that estimative index of giving all your plants an excess of things, but it's more than lean. The lean method, which I actually dose on my UNS 45U because I want to minimize algae and bring out reds, that doesn't have any nitrates in it. So you still get the other macros and you get all your micros, but by not having nitrates included in the fertilizer, it's hypothesized that plants will express more reds. And many of us in this hobby have anecdotal evidence supporting that, myself included. It works. Try it for yourself, but keep an eye on the health of your plants, because if your plants can't source nitrates from somewhere in the tank, they may eventually become nutrient deprived. So keep an eye on your health. All right, let's talk about the next project I've got coming up in here for spring 2024. So the next tank I'm gonna do is a UNS 90S. This is a large, shallow aquarium that, you know, takes up 90 centimeters of width, which is really cool. I love that widescreen aspect ratio of a tank. So I'm in the process of kind of formulating things in my mind, but I just want to make sure I'm staying in this apartment for another year before I place the order. And you know how it is with moving in tanks. It's just a nightmare. And I've done that a couple times in the last few years. So don't want to do it again, hoping to stay here for a few more years, but just want to confirm that. But if there's anything you would love to see me scape this year, let me know down below in the comments. I read every single comment, reply to everyone, so I'd love to hear your ideas. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Logan with Logan Rando Aquascaping, and I hope you enjoyed my little studio tour. I'll catch you guys and gals next time.